I'm not a political strategist, but I would have thought trash talking, as they say here, veterans, dead veterans, people who are honoured here in the US, is not necessarily a particularly wise political strategy.
Let's go to America now. Donald Trump may yet face prosecution despite a wide-ranging immunity ruling by the Supreme Court. The former president's been hit with a new indictment for allegedly seeking to subvert the 2020 election. We can talk to David Charter, who is the US Assistant Editor for The Times. David, I'm sure an awful lot of people listening to that introduction there will think, haven't I heard this before? Where are we at with this story today? What's new about this?
Right. So what had to happen was that this astonishing Supreme Court ruling, this very wide-ranging decision they made on immunity for American presidents, had to be taken account of by the prosecutor in the case, Jack Smith, the special counsel, because of course Trump's side were seeking to have all the cases against him thrown out, saying that he's allowed to carry out actions such as leaning on his Justice Department to carry out investigations into the election and to try and suggest to the swing states that there was such a lot of fraud that they should have a slate of electors chosen to represent Trump rather than Biden, who was the winner. And these go to the heart of the case. So what Jack Smith has tried to do in this new indictment that's been published this week is to make his charges stick, basically. He's seen his case, his federal case for Trump retaining classified documents thrown out by a court, and he doesn't want this one thrown out as well. So he slimmed down the indictment quite a lot. He's taken out all of the charges, all of the allegations, I should say, relating to Trump's pressure on the Department of Justice to intervene and to lean on the states and to carry out investigations. All of that's been removed. And what remains is really allegations against Trump. They're emphasizing it as a candidate rather than as acting as the president. Jack Smith is saying he was acting as a candidate seeking to overturn the election that he lost. And that's important because, as we know, this US Supreme Court ruling gave the presumption of immunity for all the core actions of a president while still in office, which Trump was,
Right.
come January the 6th.
So that's the important thing that we should hang on to then, the fact that that presidential privilege is being challenged and therefore the charges might stick because this blanket of immunity will have been removed.
Yeah, the presidential privilege gave the presumption of immunity for all core actions. No, it gave absolute immunity for all the core actions of a president, and it gave the presumption of immunity for all the other actions that a president takes while he's president. And so Jack Smith has to get round this. So as I say, he's emphasizing that Trump was acting as a candidate. And when he's talking about his pressure on Mike Pence, the vice president, to throw out the results from the swing states that Biden won, which was the core of what was happening on January the 6th, 2021, he's emphasizing that Mike Pence in his role as running mate rather than his role as vice president. And the indictment has been totally redrawn to emphasize the role of people who are not in government. So the senior justice official who was helping Trump put pressure on states, his role has been removed from the indictment. He was down as a co-conspirator, and instead it's relying on the efforts of people who were out in the states, who were, if you know the details of the case, they were putting together a whole slate of Republicans to represent that state in the formal vote counting, rather than putting together a slate of Democrats to represent Biden. And so it's that part of the indictment that is staying. And now, of course, it's up to a judge to assess whether Trump can be tried and convicted based on his role as candidate, even though he was still president. It's a very difficult balancing act, and we're in uncharted waters. But I think, as you were suggesting at the top, the upshot of it all is it's so complicated that we're just not going to see this in court before the election.
Yeah.
Which was the original idea, I think, was to get it out of the way before the election. Now we're into what's less than 80 days before the election. Is just not going to happen.
Right. And in the meantime, I mean, obviously, Trump is out there doing his stuff. He's been on a visit to Arlington, hasn't he? And actually, hasn't that gone a little bit wrong today, David?
So, yes, much was made of this by the Trump campaign because he was invited to Arlington by the families of the 13 service members who were killed in Afghanistan during the withdrawal. That was on the anniversary on Monday. What's emerged is that there was some kind of altercation between the Trump people and a member of the Arlington staff about filming in a restricted area. So there's a very sensitive part of Arlington called Section 60, which is where recently deceased service members are buried. And that's not to be used for political purposes in any filming or performance or event. And of course, the Trump team were doing that, and a member of Arlington staff seems to have tried to intervene and got into some sort of tussle. Arlington isn't saying very much about it. It's only emerged through an NPR report. That's a National Public Radio here. And the Trump team has said, well, there was one person who seemed to be mentally ill who was trying to intervene in our event when we were invited there. So at the moment, it's a he said sort of situation. But there does seem to have been some sort of kerfuffle. And it just seems that at the moment, we're in a phase where Trump just can't get anything right in this election. Since Kamala Harris emerged, he's been trying any which way to land a blow. And of course, this was to be weaponized, if you like, this Afghanistan withdrawal anniversary, to try and remind people that the Biden-Harris administration had made a big old mess of withdrawing from Afghanistan to try and score political points. But again, it's in danger of being overshadowed and misfiring.
And of course, it would just show the most dreadful lack of respect, though, David, were it to be ascertained for sure that Trump's team have been trampling over such a place of grief.
I'm excited because it's Kamala Harris's first TV interview. And there are two really interesting things here which I think are worth discussing. The first is who she chose to be interviewed by. You know, we've had this big discussion about the debate with Trump, but choosing who does her first interview is a big issue. And also, she's taking the vice president candidate. So talk us through those two bits.
Well, first of all, Kamala Harris hasn't given an interview to the press, the networks, in the now, I think it's 38 days since she became the Democratic candidate. She's becoming a lot of pressure for that. She's not talking to the press. People say she's not opening herself up to scrutiny. So tonight, for the first time, we see her on TV. She's doing an interview with CNN, which I think your listeners are probably aware that CNN is quite a liberal broadcaster in the States. It's got a reputation of being very tough on Trump, perhaps a bit less tough on the Democrats. And so straight away, the Republicans and Trump's campaign have said, you know, she's going for a softball interview, she's going to get easy questions, and she's not going to be really challenged on the things that Americans want to know, her policies and what she'll do as president. The other sort of slightly controversial aspect, I suppose, is that she's taking along Tim Walz, her running mate, the guy who's going to be vice president if she wins in November. Again, you know, the accusation there from the Republicans is that she needs a babysitter to help her along with some of the more difficult questions when she's asked them later on.
Yeah, and I think there's some merit in that. I mean, she may say that she's kind of introducing the ticket, but it does seem odd to have the vice president. The actual interview of Dana Bash, I mean, she's very well known. She was presumably one of these multi-million-dollar political interviewers that the Americans pay so much money to. But tell me a bit about her in terms of how she's likely to approach this interview.
Well, I mean, she's also a very professional broadcaster as well, and I'm sure that she will ask the tough question. Dana Bash is very experienced. She's done presidential debates before. She's broadcast from around the world. But it is true that, unlike in the UK, where our broadcasters are bipartisan, they're neutral, in America those rules don't exist. And you have broadcasters who lean to the left, as people say that CNN does, and others that lean to the right as well. And they say it's not any surprise that Kamala Harris, who's been in negotiations with the broadcasters for some time now about when she does an interview, who she does it with, and as you just alluded to there, who the interviewer is. It's not really a surprise that she's plucked CNN out the air and Dana Bash has been picked to be the interviewer.
Now, look, I don't know how impartial I meant to be, but obviously I think Donald Trump is pretty extraordinary figure, as in ghastly. But even he, I don't think, I mean, this photo shoot at Arlington Cemetery, he had himself photographed at the gravesite. Well, it was a wreath-laying ceremony, but it was by the graves of 13 US servicemen and women killed in the 2021 suicide bomb attack outside Kabul airport. Of course, it was 3 years. In fact, we marked it on the programme by doing a big thing about women's rights in Afghanistan. It's 3 years since the Americans pulled out. So it was obviously designed to remind the American people about the chaotic withdrawal which happened under President Biden, even though the withdrawal was signed by Trump. But he's there with his sort of thumbs up by somebody's grave. And now there are reports that some of his team were incredibly rude, shoved and verbally abused an employee during the photo shoot. Tell us about this story, and tell us as well kind of how big is it playing?
It's quite a remarkable story, really. As you say, it's 3 years since the withdrawal from Afghanistan, when the Marines, or mostly members of the Marine Corps, were killed. Donald Trump marked that on Monday by, as you say, going to Arlington Cemetery. And for, I think, pretty much your listeners are aware, Arlington Cemetery is a site just outside Washington, D.C., where lots of American war dead are buried. There are thought to be about 400,000 graves at Arlington. He turned up there on Monday to mark this occasion, obviously, I think, making a political point that the withdrawal had been a bit disastrous, and the Biden administration hadn't really understood the speed with which the Taliban was taking control in Afghanistan again. He stood there, as you say, over a grave with his trademark thumbs up sign. And one or two of the Arlington staff, I think, pointed out that there are rules as to how you conduct yourself in Arlington, and one of those is that you're not allowed to take photographs or shoot video at the grave sites, especially those more recent ones. This meant that Trump's people were challenged and they pushed back. Now, Trump's campaign absolutely denies that there was any physical confrontation, just a verbal one. Arlington isn't really commenting, but sources to various US media which are picking this up, and it's playing very hard here, saying that there was a physical altercation. I can't understand how Trump gets away with it. I mean, he trashed John McCain as a loser for being captured by the Viet Cong, even though he endured 5 years of captivity and torture. He trashes people who die in war as losers. Veterans are so important to the American psyche. How does he get away with it? He's got his grip over the Republican Party, and I mean, he famously said in 2016 that he could stand on Fifth Avenue in New York and shoot someone, and he wouldn't lose any votes. I mean, there is merit to that comment. He gets away with a lot. He's obviously a convicted felon now. He's someone who has his core of support. Now, you know, I'm not a political strategist, but I would have thought trash talking, as they say here, dead veterans, people who are honoured here in the US, is not necessarily a particularly wise political strategy. But what Donald Trump was trying to point out is that these killed US soldiers are dead because of Joe Biden and his policies, and by extension Kamala Harris, and that as president he would withdraw America from foreign wars. So I think that was the point he was trying to make. You're the politician. You're the politician. I'm not sure.
I can just about discern the political point that he was trying to make.
I noticed that Kamala Harris has been campaigning in the state of Georgia this week. I also noticed that there's been some action in the courts there, where some on the Democratic side are worried about, well, Republicans, Trump supporters, in key positions when it comes to monitoring and certifying election results, working against Kamala Harris, using that position to maybe they suggest, overturn a win for Kamala Harris. Are you worried about that?
Well, I mean, I think anybody should be worried about that. I mean, this is on the other side, right? You have the, Vice President Harris's vision of the future taking us forward. You have Donald Trump on the other side and his vision of taking us backward. And that includes undoing our democracy, tearing apart key pieces of it. I mean, he still claims somehow that he won the 2020 election, which he actually lost by millions of votes and was certified in state after state. And his 2025, his Project 2025 blueprint includes, among other things, promises to continue to undermine the democracy, make himself a dictator on day one, undo checks and balances, and effectively undermine the very foundations of democracy. That is a real and serious threat, and it's something that, of course, many people are taking very seriously. There are many lawyers who have been engaged to make sure that that does not happen. And that voters have their votes counted and can rely on that being the case.
Yeah, I imagine that's going to be a theme of the coming TV debates as well. Interesting to see where the balance is struck between warning of Donald Trump as a threat to democracy and just mocking him, making fun of him. We'll see the way that Kamala Harris plays that. I'm going to a story that's been breaking pretty much while we've been talking. It's in a sense, it's probably a question you're going to welcome as a Democrat, but it's an interesting one. I mean, Donald Trump was in Arlington National Cemetery a couple of days ago, which is it's a revered cemetery for military American veterans. And Donald Trump was pictured there, smiling with his thumb up in that campaign style, criticised for that demeanour. And there was a bit of an argument, we know this, between Trump staff and some of the Army on duty at Arlington. They told him this has got to be a place, the Army personnel said, you don't campaign in Arlington, and there was a bit of an argument. And now the US Army, if you're aware of this, has rebuked the Trump campaign. Do you think that will hurt Donald Trump? Because some of these questions about Trump's relationship to the military, his attitude to the military, predate the arrival of Kamala Harris, and he was still strong in the polls then. Would it matter, this argument, do you think?
Well, the answer, John, is I hadn't seen that, but I certainly hope so. This, as you're well aware, this is a pattern of outrageous behavior that certainly did not begin with this event and will not end with it either. I mean, I'm old enough to remember during his first campaign when talking about Senator John McCain, who had been the Republican nominee for president, as we all remember, and was had heroic service in the Vietnam War that included many years of being a political prisoner, during which he was tortured. Donald Trump said he liked people who don't get captured. I mean, that to me still remains one of the most stunning and cruel things I have ever heard a political candidate say, and that was about a member of his own political party. And I just think that's an indication of the many ways over many years that former President Trump has just sort of manifested himself as the vice president said, as an unserious man. And in all of these other ways that we've been discussing, whether it's our democracy, whether it's a national abortion ban and overturning Roe versus Wade, it has demonstrated his unfitness. The fact that he presents a vision of this country that would take us backward and really undermine key essential rights, freedoms, and traditions.
Okay, so it's going to be a big moment, Dave, isn't it? You'll be rooting for Kamala Harris, I've no doubt, but it's going to be a big moment, maybe a big test, when Kamala Harris and Tim Walz sits down with CNN, with Dana Bash for that interview, which is a risk. I mean, she has been only by a bit, but she's the front runner, it seems, in the polls just at the moment, which carries its own risks. And there are going to be bear traps to be negotiated in a few hours.
Well, I think what I would say is the vice president has done, I believe, something like 80 interviews this year. The president and the vice presidential candidate doing a sit-down interview after the convention. That's pretty standard practice. And so I think I've seen this, I got to see this up close and personal. The vice president is really good. And I think the whole country has seen that. She is really good at explaining what she wants to do and why. She is an incredibly compelling candidate. She's an incredibly compelling speaker. And I expect this interview this evening to be no different, and for her to really clearly lay out the contrast in this election.
And yet she has something of a reputation for being a little bit uncertain, put it that way, when it comes to speaking impromptu, without an auto cue, without a script to work from. When it comes to speaking off the cuff, that is a part of her reputation. You can't deny that, Dave, can you?
I guess my answer to that is, there were many things that I've been asked when I was working for her, and even since then, and sort of speculations about the vice president. I would say, the whole country and the whole world, frankly, has had a chance to watch the vice president in front of the brightest of lights over the past, whatever this has been, 6 weeks. And look at her performance. Look at what she has done. And this has not just been unscripted speeches, which in my opinion, she has knocked out of the park, to use an American expression. She has been absolutely incredible, and her speech last Thursday, I was there for in Chicago at the Democratic National Convention, was incredible. But she's also been so good in every other format. I mean, I just think I had been telling people all along that the vice president was an extraordinary vice president, and would be someday an extraordinary presidential candidate and president. And I think that's what we've seen over the past 6 weeks.
Okay, look, you're being very, very supportive, and I completely get that. I can see where that support is coming from, where you're concerned. But I mean, will you concede maybe that your heart's going to be just a little bit in your mouth when she faces tough questioning, because there will be tough questioning from CNN on such things as, price controls, controlling grocery store prices. She hasn't explained how that's going to work, or limiting the terms on which Supreme Court justices serve. She's said to have given such an undertaking privately. Hasn't been asked about that yet. These things there's potential there to come unstuck.
Well, and look, you're absolutely right that there are going to be tough, serious questions. But I think what I would say is the vice president is uniquely well suited to answer them. So I'm not nervous at all. I'm excited. I mean, the vice president has been, I say she's been under the brightest of lights for the past 6 weeks. The truth is she's been under the brightest of lights for the past 4 years. And even before that. I mean, she was a senator from the largest state in America, and that state's attorney general before that. I mean, this is somebody who is as well tested, as well seasoned, and as proven a leader on really every one of these issues as anybody in America. And I think that is why I'm excited to see her describe what it is that she wants to do as president, why she's running, and hear from, hopefully the next vice president in Tim Walz as well. I really think that the two of them offer such a compelling vision for what this country can be, how it can support the middle class, how it can protect and expand people's rights and freedoms. And that, I think, is what people are responding to and hungry for.
Where Kamala Harris has shifted her position, because she has, since running for the nomination back in 2020 to becoming the vice president under Joe Biden, and then softening some positions here and there, maybe moving more towards the center. She has become, let's use the word flexible, she's compromised. What does that mean for you? Does that mean that she's, willing to give way on principle? Does it mean that she's practical? How would you describe it?
Well, I mean, look, I think that it's interesting. I'm not sure that I can agree with your characterization, in part because, for example, her work on housing, reducing housing costs and helping people purchase homes, that was one of the centerpieces of her economic remarks a couple weeks ago. That's an issue that she's been working on for the better part of 15 plus years. I mean, when she was Attorney General of California, she stood up to the big banks during the mortgage crisis here in the United States, and worked on a homeowner's bill of rights. And so, that to me is actually completely in keeping with who she has been as a leader in political office, and completely in keeping, as she mentioned herself, with her family's history, growing up in a working class neighborhood in Oakland, California, with a working mother who raised her and her sister, and had to save and scrimp to purchase a home finally after being a renter.
But she is willing to compromise on principle where required.
I wouldn't say that she's willing to compromise on her principles at all. I mean, I think her principles have been absolutely clear and consistent since she entered politics many years ago. I think that the truth is that policy is big and complicated, and that she's, it depends sort of who's in Congress, who's in the House, who's in the Senate, what are the possibilities for passing legislation and securing the votes that you need.
Yeah.
I'll note here that she has set the record in American history for number of tie-breaking votes cast in the Senate. So certainly, I think you could argue fairly, she's the vice president who's responsible for the most policy achievements, arguably in American history.
Yeah.
And so I think that's sort of what I think about when you ask about her principles. They've always stayed true and stayed the same. You can go back to her remarks when she was a district attorney of San Francisco and see that.
Yeah.
I think the question is just we know the why, so the question is how.
Okay, I'm guessing there will be questions to come on the solidity of those convictions.